The list of books one can also buy at Dodsley's store. This is not unusual, of course, in this time period. Indeed, it would be unusual only if this kind of advertisement were not there. Nonetheless, it is useful to point out the ramifications of business as usual. This book of knowledge is bookended, as it were, between two statements of property, between the copyright proclamation which commences it, the statement which clarifies the evolving notion of intellectual property, and a list of properties to purchase at the end. If art and commerce were conjoined for Dodsley, so then was pedagogy and property. The end.
Just a small point, Lisa. You said that taking on the role of instructing the Prince or King was a Whig act?
A bookseller offering to instruct this.
Well, I mean, it's in the long tradition of speculative Brinkovitz, where anybody who's learned can instruct a monarch. That's tradition. It's not necessarily an act of class arrogance on his part.
Okay.
But it may have democratic reverberations.
I think I think the emphasis, though, that this is how he's going to earn the esteem of the prince will earn the esteem, win the hearts of his countrymen, maintain his dignity through this. All that is not natural. It has to be constructed through reading this book. That's how he can become the patriot king, which does have political overtones in the period, for sure.
Okay. One other question.
But thank you. That's a good point.
The booksellers are doing work for people that in previous eras people had to do for themselves. Keep a commonplace book of important quotes, information, whatever. You talk about the kind of history of this in terms of what booksellers take on themselves from an older kind of practice. This is a good example of what you're giving, and it has a lot to do with, I guess, the history of textbooks. But what a person would do on an individual basis then, in some sense, can be a model for what somebody does for a wider use among various individuals.
You know, one point I make in the larger project, and I've made here at different brown bags, is, and I do see this as kind of in the tradition of commonplacing, absolutely, is when you look at the descriptions of commonplacing, it's so mechanical. It's not just about knowledge, it's about sharpening your pen and writing and learning to copy and learning your hand to do that and positioning your body to sew. The school books from the earlier period, when they're talking about copying, really emphasize the tools, these personal tools that you need to write in order to learn. And the rhetoric I'm seeing in these print ones, once the bookseller takes over this role, is that he's doing all that mechanical work for you. All you have to do is read. You never need to touch a pen again. So reading becomes also sort of dematerialized. No more tools, no more technologies, no more really body even.
I'm really interested in that concept of the reader who's the writer who's the reader. And in the 18th century, early 19th century, that's such a big issue. I'm thinking things like, what's a Gentleman's Magazine was started in the 30s?
Well, it's in the 40s, 50s. I don't know the starting date, but yeah,
it's 37, something like
that. It's a big rival to some of Dodsley's.
Yeah, but I mean that you have the readers send in material. I mean that's what the magazine consists of. And similarly, later on, there's a much more middle class version of that with the monthly magazine, late 18th century, early 19th century. And even the reviews, the monthly and critical, by and large, when they review a book, they just have a ton of quotations. In other words, the review is just marshal, these long blocks of quotations. I mean, there are some real reviews, but the assumptions of that are that the reader of this is going to have the capacity to make a judgment. So it's a critical reader. So that the reviewer doesn't have to make the judgment. It's assuming the reader's going to do it. But that's the big shift is with the Edinburgh Review, early 19th century, because then you get not nearly as many quotations and it's opinion, long opinion pieces. So there's the big shift there. But it's fascinating that you can see the two tendencies in Dodsley's work. The one is familiarize yourself with great writing to be a writer, and the other one is you're not supposed to be a writer.
Right. You're just supposed to be appreciating those beauties.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like Dodsley is training the readers for these periodicals, so they can appreciate those long quotes.
Right.
But the part about the point you make about these periodicals containing essays or letters sent in by readers is interesting, I think, and complicates what I'm saying more.
Yeah.
So I want to look into that
Right.
more. I had not thought about that, because there you do have readers who are also writing in this medium of print, which seems in other ways to not encourage that.
Oh yeah, I mean, Gentleman's Magazine is interesting, but the monthly magazine is really fascinating because it's at a much more middle class magazine. It's middle class dissenters, scientists, doctors, people like that. And other than the editorial, every issue would have some kind of editorial stuff, but by and large, it would be contributions of the readers.
So isn't it true that so it sounds like what you're saying about the Edinburgh Reviews, that as you turn into the 19th century, that reader participation just becomes more and more minimized.
It diminishes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of what I'm looking at circulates, is going towards more the end of the century.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that makes sense to me.
Right. But you can still see the tension. But you're right. That is what's triumphant at the end.
Right. And I didn't talk about it here, but I've written about Dodsley in my book, and there I talk about his self-construction as a bookseller who is printing genius. And he, for example, printed Edwards Young Conjectures on Original Composition. So he's very much in the mode of promoting this new idea that genius is something that springs from within, it's organic, it can't be learned. It's not about reading the most and having the most to say because you're so well educated.
Yeah. One last comment. In that regard, it seems like Pope's essay and criticism and Dunciad and all that kind of thing. That's also about proper ways of reading and also arrogant ways of writing. In other words, writing when you shouldn't be writing because you don't know enough.
Right. Right.
And you're making a fool of yourself and that kind of thing. So that seems to be part of the mix as well.
Well, again, Pope started Dodsley off. And he chose Dodsley in his later career as the guy who was going to get his writing right because he wasn't going to interfere. Dodsley is the muse's midwife. He is going to take the genius, like Pope, and get it to the